Thank you all for being here to join ASGSR students for another monthly webinar. This time we're welcoming Christopher Craddock. He is the CEO and founder of RocketStar Incorporated. RocketStar aims to develop solutions for precise cargo delivery to, from, and through space. They plan to leverage existing reusable rocket systems and autonomous spacecraft to provide a cost-effective, scalable point-to-point delivery system. Chris founded RocketStar in 2014 with a bachelor's in physics and over 20 years of entrepreneurial and financial experience. Before running RocketStar, he worked on the PHENIX project, which proved the existence of the fifth state of matter, the quark-gluon plasma. He also founded and ran his own commodity training company, Surfacing Institution. Thank you so much for being here today, Chris. We're so excited to hear from you.
Yeah, I really want to thank you all for number one, inviting me and putting this together. I saw the post the other day and I blushed. So thank you. As you all probably well know, being hard workers and entrepreneurs yourselves, you don't realize what you're doing sometimes until somebody pulls you away from it and says, look, this is what you've been doing. And I'm very lucky to not only have done what I've done, be part of what I'm doing, but be supported by a good group of friends and colleagues and family that have kind of just not only cheered me through it, but also helped me stand out from a crowd, because that's the only way I can do it, is by standing on the shoulders of my friends. So I guess without further ado, I'll somehow share my screen.
Yeah. Let me know if you have any trouble with that.
Yeah, there, share screen. Now I would do, where is this thing? There, that one. Ha, okay. See if I can change the view on this thing. Well, anyway, I guess this is fine. So yeah, as stated previously, I started RocketStar with two of my friends 10 years ago with the aim of creating better access to space. And one of our investors recently kind of coined a term, because we were trying to find a simple way to describe what we do or what we're trying to do. And she's like, you guys put things up, you move them around, and you talk to them. And I'm like, that's it. That's what we do. So we were trying to do three things. Using a novel form of an aerospike engine to create a single stage to orbit, fully reusable launch vehicle to get to space easier, quicker, faster, more reliably. Using the most efficient thruster right now to move things around up there, and then also augmenting it with a form of fusion to then increase the power so that we can get back and forth to the moon and Mars a lot quicker. And lastly, using digital signal processing to interpret data such that we could communicate below the noise level, find things easier, use astrogation a lot better, and track it a lot better. So those the three tall temples of what we do. Yeah, so this is kind of exactly what I was talking about. The picture there is probably, that's from our last launch attempt out of Mojave, which was interesting, to say the least. And I got to give a lot of credit to not only my team, which were exceptional, but also the Friends of Amateur Rocketry. They're like NASA in the 50s. They just get stuff done. But here, just a quick talk about the tech. It utilizes an engine that we kind of made better, but it's started working on in the 50s from different companies like Aerojet Rocketdyne. That inherently goes after the problem that all bell nozzles face, which is they're bound by the structure of the nozzle, and therefore the pressure of the exit gases within the nozzle does not change relative to the atmosphere. So the atmosphere will change as you fly upwards. There'll be less and less pressure, but the interior pressure of the nozzle does not. So that creates a loss of thrust. So therefore, you have to optimize your engine nozzles for certain bands of atmosphere. Most notably down here, the soup of atmosphere from here to about 14 kilometers, and everything else gets to be parts per million after that. So the aerospike turns it on its head. It goes from, a cup like this, where you have, everything's in here, it turns it around such that the propellant is not inside anything, it's on the outside, like a waterfall coming down the sides. So it's bound by one side around a conical nozzle like this, to create a push against something, the Newtonian, equal and opposite reaction. But the other side of it is the exit gases can now expand along with the atmosphere. So you get a theoretical one-to-one as things fly up. This thing expands, and when it comes down, and it contracts. So both from an exit point and also from an entry point, it just works a lot better. This kind of goes more than what I talk about, so I don't want to spend too much time on all the wonderful words that make my eyes hurt. Same thing here. I'll stop here for a second because this is kind of the real reason why we're chasing this. And, we've recently kind of just taken a back seat on development just because it's just so hard. But we're still pursuing it because you can create a cadence that approaches airline capability, which, let's face it, rockets are not there yet. We're doing probably under 200 launches a year with everyone, including China. Whereas airlines are doing 100,000 a day. And the only way we're going to get to that point is if you can have single stage or something close to it, like what Starship is doing. And honestly, I don't think we'll be anywhere close to Starship size using an aerospike in the next 20 years, just because it's just so hard to optimize. But small launch vehicles where you're putting up 600 to 2,000 kilograms at a time, yeah, I think it's stupid to be anything but single stage, just because of all of the things that can go wrong, all of the duplication you have to do, the explosive bolts, the this, the that, the other. And I think, a lot of you probably pay attention to the launch vehicles recently. Most of the launch vehicles don't have problems on the first stage. It's when they have to do staging in the atmosphere or above is when they run into problems, most notably Astra, and to an effect, Rocket Lab and also Firefly. Nothing against those companies. They have their own issues, but their underlying engineers and engineering people there are amazing. I've met a lot of them. It's just staging is hard. So if we can get past that, a lot of things open up. You get precision launches, you get point-to-point drops, you get responsive capabilities. Right now, if I wanted to launch something, I would have to get in line and go to NASA and say, okay, I need something done. They say, okay, we'll see you in 4 months to 2 years. The quickest anybody can pack, deliver, test, and get ready for launch from Kennedy or Vandenberg is 4 months. And that, I don't care who you are, it has nothing to do with the launch vehicle. It has to do with the logistics of moving everything to a pad and getting it ready to go up. And it also assumes that you have a pad available. If anybody's been to Kennedy recently, it is crowded. And I spent a lot of time with my team trying to figure out how to launch from there, from pad 14, I think it is, or 24, 26. And a lot of the missions got scrubbed, not because we weren't ready, but because they came in and said, sorry, we just got notified that NASA needs to go up on this particular window, or SpaceX is right next to us, or this particular spook thing is next to us, and they need the pad availability or the window for that particular date. So it's just become a very crowded spot. And if you have the ability to take off either from the ocean for a small launch vehicle or something akin to what Virgin Orbit did, where you can just use any particular runway and then find water and launch over it, you're capability opens up dramatically. You won't be able to put up 100 tons at a time, but you'll be able to put up rapidly and efficiently. So when the astronauts are up there and they're dropping wrenches and they're like, oh man, I need another one of those, they can just be like, I'll be right back. And that's where we want to get to with a lot of this tech. So that kind of goes with what we're going to do. I want to get down to just briefly talk about here. We do have a lot of patents that we have applied for and have been awarded. Added to this, we just got notified 2 weeks ago that the fusion propulsion patent that we put in will be allowed. So we'll be the only company on the planet that'll not only have shown that we could use fusion as a propulsion method, but also we'll have a patent on it. So this is where I was talking about earlier. I talk a lot about the launch vehicle, but I want to talk a little bit about the in-space propulsion and signal enhancement side of it. You can be a rocket company and put things up, but then what happens afterwards? You know, most companies, no matter how good they are, don't put a rocket into that particular orbit that you need to dump payload. Most of the time, you have conglomerate payloads or different payloads that need a different orbit. So what's that last mile? What is that going to look like? So it's one of the reasons why we have our thruster capability and we're developing the fusion thruster, more of like a last mile entry or a deorbit capability. Because a lot of companies now will do what's called ESPA rings, and they'll aggregate all of the different CubeSats, microsats, or larger sats, have them go up, deploy, let them go, and fire off some form of either chemical or electric propulsion thruster. They'll just take more time and put it into the relative orbit. And then last but not least, probably the most important thing, you can throw things up all you want, but if you don't know where they are and they're not talking to you and you don't know how to listen to them, it doesn't matter. And the CTO, who I'll show in another slide, when he put up his CubeSat on Artemis when he was part of Team Miles, he realized, number one, I'm not going to be able to put up something with a huge enough radar system that it's going to be able to talk back to me. This thing was literally being put 10 million miles past the moon. So relative distance, if you think about, you look at your hand and what's the relative to that, that'd be like finding an atom in your hand. So good luck. So he knew it was going to be really, really weak signals, and he knew he couldn't get on like the Deep Space Network, which is like 1 million a day, or the ESA network, which is still relatively expensive, even though less. He had to figure out a way to communicate below the noise level. And so that's how signal enhancement came about. He developed an algorithm that could take all this weak signal and, number one, identify that it was his and not someone else's. Number two, listen to, find out what it was saying, and then talk back to it. And last but not least, he used the same algorithm to identify the very weak signals that come from wherever they're coming from, whether it be the moon, the sun, pulsar 843, any particular verified radio RF frequency that is really weak, but is still out there. Take those 6 points and then figure out, just like in Stargate, where you are. And that is a much easier thing to do than hauling out some of the astrogation systems that some of the other satellites use. They're also much more expensive, much bigger. So like anything else, and this is, tried and true analogy, necessity is the mother of invention. He didn't have the money, so he had to figure this out. Anyway, so more pictures about us going up. Here's where I want to get to. So Yeah, Wes, I wish could be here and probably talk more about this than I can, but he was one of those guys that when you were going off and talking about, are you going to go to the prom or not? He was in his attic creating a pulse plasma laser. So, and I'm not even kidding, he was doing that when he was 12. So, uh, this was a long time dream of his. He paid the bills through software engineering, but ultimately just decided one day to just figure it out, much like the rest of us, and came up with the constant Q thruster, which eventually became now our joint Firestar endeavor, which is, I'll give you some numbers that I think are meaningful. You look at most in-space propulsion methods, and they draw 80 to 100 watts in order to create about 5 or 6 millinewtons of thrust. His base thruster that we now use at RocketStar takes about 1 to 2 watts to do 16 millinewtons. So it's a ridiculous game changer in terms of thruster capability. And it came about through the wonderful zeitgeist that's being talked about now, which is AI. But when he was doing it, before it was cool, it was called machine learning. And he basically took first principles of the equation of thrust, plugged it into the machine learning and say, give me the most efficient thruster capable. And it spat out this answer that when a lot of physicists have looked at it and like, that's impossible. And we're like, no, it isn't. Because essentially what it did was the part of the equation that goes after pressure, most physicists zero it out because they figure, okay, we're in space, there's a vacuum, we can't have pressure. But what this system found was inside the thruster itself, there's enough pressure going on between the particles that it does create essentially a pulse plasma detonation sort of thing. And that optimizes it so there's huge waves after waves of particles pushing themselves out and creating essentially the effect of throwing a wiffle ball down a windy hallway. And that became the fulcrum to then take what was normally this and do this to it. So, proof is in the pudding. We've done hundreds, if not thousands, of ground tests. It's going to fly July 8th off of the Transporter 11, the Falcon 9, and deorbit is going to be hosting the payload. So we're just at that change point where we're about to just prove to the world, like, see, it works even in space. But, as everyone well knows, until the data shows up, nobody cares. Brad has helped me form this company in its more current generation. We merged with Miles Space last year, and Brad helped us with that. He also helped on the rocket side of it. As you can see in the bottom photo, he's the one touching the nose cone as we moved it over to the rail. His background is in the Pentagon, and he automatically saw the military applications of this, which were in, I don't know how many talks we're in at this point with different generals, colonels, and what have you. We've got some early contracts that he's championed, and now we're getting into some of the deeper and bigger things that I can't even talk about. Let's see. Yeah, probably, I'll talk about this a little bit, but it is important because we wouldn't be here without money. At the end of the day, you can't do anything without it. But money doesn't just exist in a vacuum. Money comes from people. And the people that have believed in this company are the 3 people you see there, plus about 37 other people. And they have all lended over to us just about, well, this figure's kind of old. I think we're about 4.5 million as of today. And, it's an expensive side of the business. And thankfully, actually, this has been pretty cheap in terms of this burn, considering all that we've accomplished. But we're probably going to burn through a lot more going forward. So, and I say that not so much as to be deleterious about the what we do here and what entrepreneurialism is, just more of just giving people the realization that it's not cheap and it takes a lot of money to get through before you can get to the big money. Let's see. Yeah, this is important, very much so. You don't have a business if you don't have a customer, but it has to be married with amazing tech that works. And the last 10 years, chiefly what we've been doing is exactly that. We've been battle testing these systems to the point where, you can kick them, shoot them, do whatever, call it this, call it that, and it will prove out. So yes, customer maturization, cost of customers, all of the other KPIs that people talk about are important. But if you don't have something that ultimately delivers, it's not going to matter. And that, that is going to be showed out within the next couple of months after we get data from the thruster. It's already proving out on the software side of it because that's just easier to implement. The military is just bananas for it. We're talking with other commercials, but that's a different animal. So we want the military gives us a validation as well as it gives us funding. So we're kind of focusing more on that right now. Yeah, that kind of shows our campaign going forward. I think we're a little bit farther ahead of this chart than it thinks it is. And I'll go into that more Q&A because otherwise I'll just be sitting here listing things. But I want to point out, again, employees, investors, all important, but also contractors and partners. I cannot say enough for the help from Tricep, Jason Armstrong, who's no longer with the company, is still a great guy. He works with Tensor Solutions now. He championed us for a long time, years. It's just he's like, no, I think you guys got what it takes, and they helped us a lot in terms of maturization of the tech, putting us in touch with the right people at NASA, and also helping us with our media and visuals. So I cannot say enough that if you're going to try and do something like this, yes, get the right team, but also create a network because that network will support you. You cannot internalize everything. And there we go. I'll just stop there. Now I'll stop sharing my screen and go back to the other thing. There we go.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was so interesting for us. Folks, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand and then I'll be able to unmute you so you can ask your question directly. In the meantime, you can also drop them in the chat. We do have one question already. It says, for someone interested in starting their own company based on their research after grad school, where should someone start? Do you know of any good resources for trying to put together a business plan?
Live Plan is a good one. It costs like 100 something a year, but it will help you build out step by step, what the business plan should look like, and it also pretties it up so that your first shot at a business plan doesn't look like something you did on the back of a napkin. That's a good one. I'd recommend talking to your schools, what are called what I know in my space is Strategic Business Innovation Research, or SBIRs. They're also something called STTRs, and that will give you non-dilutive capital to essentially mature your technology and then, help you get through it, but also create a product that the SBIR funder is looking to do. This happens a lot in the military, but there's also non-military like NASA, like trying to think of some of the other federal organizations that would do this, National Science Foundation. But talk to your school because they should have a side to do this. I know my school, Stony Brook, they're one of the largest SBIR awardees on the planet right now. I think next to just MIT. At least that's what they're claiming. But regularly they're doing $20 million SBIRs per applicant, and they also not only do that, but they'll also hire the staff and people that you need in order to support that contract. So that probably exists wherever you guys are, whether it be at MIT or beyond. It's becoming a very big animal, and when I was starting out 20 years ago, it barely existed. And I did a little bit of it with Stony Brook back in 2013 and 2015, and it was state backed, and that still got me. I still had to put up like 10 or 12 grand, but I got another 15 grand that I never saw, but it paid for the engineering research to further verify some of the products I was developing. So I would recommend that to marry with whatever business plan you're developing, because you're going to need funding, and that's the easiest way to not only get funding but also get validation.
And then taking a step back from thinking about a business plan and funding, et cetera, how do you go about identifying a niche in the first place for your company to thrive in?
Say that one more time. I lost the last piece.
How do you go about identifying a niche for your company?
That's a tough one. Because I knew when I got out of school that I wanted to be in space. Specifically because I read a book by Stephen Baxter called Time. And it was a weird premise, but the underlying part of it was very hard science fiction of mining asteroids and how it was like really possible. And I wanted to just go out there and, okay, let's start an asteroid mining company. But you have to find a special sauce. You have to find what differentiates you that no one else is doing, that's defensible, that you can reproduce and have a moat around you that no matter what other people do, that they're not going to be able to catch up with for the next 2 years. And that took time figuring out. The way I did it was researching, thinking, talking to people. And my aha moment was when I started getting on the discussion of single stage to orbit, and I drilled down on that, and I got to the point where it was to the aerospike. I'm like, well, did it work? And they're like, well, yeah, it did. The ground tests all worked, and this, that, and that thing worked, and that whatever worked. Like, why didn't they do it? They said, well, it's just not possible. And I'm like, wait a minute. But I thought you said the aerospike worked. And without going back and forth for a while, I just kept hearing how it was almost anecdotal, where the science still proved out, the engineering proved out, but for whatever reason, the popular opinion didn't think it was possible. So that kind of gave me that aha thing, like, okay, number one, nobody wants to try it, so I'll be the first. Second of all, the science still works, the engineering works. And I think also another key was I was talking to a lot of people who were on the ground crew when it was doing it. They had problems with leak checks, and they just couldn't figure it out based upon computing power and also material science. That had dramatically changed with 3D printing, with computing power and everything else. So there really was a real shot at doing it. But I'll also stress that shouldn't be your end game you shouldn't say, okay, I've got it and I'm going to not stop at anything. Yeah, that's a good idea, but always do gut checks. Always listen to other opportunities. How we got to in-space thrusters, propulsion, and communication came about by collaborating with other people. I was working with Wes on the fusion propulsion, and we were both raising money at the same time. And we were kind of just like, well, why don't we just, combine the companies? And that was kind of just like a flyer, but then it became really serious and it happened. And we discovered that, yeah, rockets are great, but they're really expensive to develop. We're gonna have to plow through another 150 million before we get to a real flight vehicle that's anywhere close to what SpaceX's stuff looked like. What could we do right now that would make money? And that, if you're going to be an entrepreneur and take a run at it, that is, I still remember this. I was talking to the guy that came up with Mandy's. I don't know if you remember that company, Mandelbaum's. And he was like, he's like, all right, I got a question for you. Somebody has a flushless toilet. Another one has great real estate. A third guy has an unbeatable team. And the fourth guy has a customer. Who has the business? And it was a trick question because the answer always is the guy with the customer. Everyone else doesn't have a business. So unless you have someone paying for your product or going to pay, it's not worth chasing after. And that's what we came to the realization, like rockets are great. We're still going to pursue it R&D wise, but the people that are paying for stuff right now are paying for the thruster and they're paying for the software. And that's a 90% profit margin on both of them. So, be flexible is what I'm trying to say.
Wow, 90% profit margins that's a high number.
Yeah. So how can you
Yeah.
ignore that?
Yeah.
I think at best rockets are 40%.
Okay.
But then you're talking big numbers. You're eating up. I think we're looking at 3 years, 40 to 60 million in costs. So then you're barely doing 80 or 100 million.
Yeah.
Those numbers. So yeah, that's a lot to plow through. And getting support to get you there, especially after like what we're running into right now, to be perfectly honest, is investors are like, oh, launch is solved. What are you talking about? SpaceX has got that. Rocket Lab's got that. How are you going to catch up? And you can say whatever you want to say to that and argue against it. But they have the money. They're going to deploy the money. So if they don't want to, you can't make them. Whereas we talk to people about the other products and they're like, yeah, when can we do that? Can we, how much do you need? Are these terms okay? What I'm trying to say is, yes, stay focused on your goals, but stay flexible on your approach.
I hear that. That makes sense. We have another question from our audience from Sasank Desaraju. He says, Time by Stephen Baxter is now on his Goodreads list. Do you have any other books or other media that you find inspiring?
Yeah. If you want to run a company, pick up The Driving Force by Peter Schutz. He turned around Porsche in the 80s. And I still remember, he has amazing management techniques. I got to reread it, but the one line I always remember is he met with Ferdinand Porsche and everybody, and they flew him out there. And at the time, he was working at Cummins, which is a truck engine manufacturer. And he had them look around and talk to him, and he finally just said to him, like, "Look, Mr. Porsche, I love that you flew me out here and showed me all this, but I know nothing about racing. I know nothing about race cars. I build truck engines." And they looked him dead in the eye and they said, "Yeah, we know that, but you know people, and that's what we're interested in." And that is the driving force between any company, is your people. It's not the money, it's not the tech, it's your people. That's what's going to deploy it. That's what's going to keep it going. So, you need the support and manage your people appropriately. So I'd recommend that book. Stephen Baxter is a great trilogy, but it's weird. I'm a big Crichton fan, so I'd recommend those. But for not entrepreneuring, read Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. If you haven't already, read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, because whether or not you want to be at war or not, it doesn't matter. When you get into business, you're in war, and you have to learn how to appropriately deal with that. Doesn't mean you have to go to war with people, but you just have to be a part of it. Like if you seek peace, plan for war. So that is very true. Yeah, that's all. That's the ones I can think of off the top of my head, but I know there's a lot more.
Thank you. Those are very interesting. I jotted some of those down myself as well. I'm also curious about your role specifically as CEO. What does that look like for you in like a day-to-day versus week-to-week type of situation?
Uh, it's an ever evolving, constant, changing, exciting roller coaster, terrifying free fall of a job. But I love it, and I'm blessed to be doing it. But it's hard, and anybody who says that they know how to do it or learn to do it through a college course, don't hang out with them. It's you crawl through glass in the morning, you chew glass in the afternoon, and you smile while you're doing it, because that's the other thing. If you don't love it, don't do it, because it will test you. So I'll answer your question directly. I manage the finances. I manage all of the people to a degree or less of a degree. I manage the operations. I'm part of the board. So I deal with the board. I try to shepherd the board, but also listen to the board. I have to listen to my people constantly. And listen is not just hearing what they say, but hearing what they want and what they need and acting appropriately. So it's action. Leadership is action. It's not position. I integrate with NASA. I integrate with the military. I'm on conference calls daily, putting out fires daily. I'm dealing with personalities. I'm mitigating situations. I'm raising money. The list goes on. So it's very complex. And honestly, my 8-year-old self is probably like, well, why are you doing this? We just wanted to be in space. We didn't want to do all this nonsense, but it's fun, but it's very taxing. But I think at the end of the day, my father called me a natural born leader. I can't stay away from it. So if I walked away, did another position, I'd bristle, because I'd be like, I can do a better job than that. I would constantly be doing that, which may not be true, but I would need to do it. So I don't think I can walk away from it.
Yeah, very interesting. You wear so many hats. That's a lot on your plate. So thank you again for
But
taking the time.
one thing about that, I wear a lot of hats, but one thing I've been getting used to is giving that person the hat.
Yeah.
So as you grow as a
Yeah.
company, like you realize that, oh, I don't need to do that anymore. I delegate that to someone else, and I respect their position to get it done.
Yeah.
So that's been a difficult transition recently. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Wow. Scaling up means more delegating.
Yeah.
What does that process look like of raising money? How do you do that?
Uh, um, I have really good teachers. Um, and that was my experience on Wall Street, of getting kicked around constantly. I was a cold caller. I didn't have my finance background, so I couldn't get a job for that reason. So but I could get a job as a cold caller, and that was hard. But it really gave me a thick skin that I could talk to anybody. I may not maybe it may not be perfect every time I talk to them, but I could pick up a phone or I could walk in a room and say hi. So that is key. But I think what's more key is networking. And I don't mean going to meetings and going to different places and picking up cards, but targeting, finding people of like mind and like thinking, and just talking about what you're doing. You don't know who they know. Eventually, you'll run into people and they'll be like, "Hey, I got a friend who was talking to me the other day, and they just had an event and they're deploying capital now. They're really interested in getting involved in the space." And I figured you came up, so I figured you guys should connect. And it sounds so random, but if you connect with enough people, that becomes almost a weekly occurrence. So a lot of the fundraising that I do comes from that kind of a network. And then probably the last big bit is hear a need, see a product. Nobody will ever buy or give you money for anything if they haven't already made the decision to do it themselves. Sometimes they don't realize they made the decision, and you have to help them get those things out of the way to say, okay, this I believe in, and I have a reasonable expectation that we're going to make money and I'm going to get money back in a reasonable amount of time. And if you can't do that, if you can't convince someone the actuals of, okay, this is a good product, here's the market, here's how we're going to get a piece out of the market and make a wild amount of return or reason, whatever it may be, then you can't raise money. There's a lot in between, and I can probably do a 10-hour course on this over a couple of weeks. Not because I know everything, but it's just going over all the things I've run into. And there's people a lot better at this than I am. It's like magic. They go into a room, they come out, and there's a check. So, no, I'm not kidding. They're out there, and I've met them.
Wow, that's impressive. And then I wanted to ask about something you mentioned during your talk about using machine learning to develop more efficient like engines and thrusters and things like that. Do you run in, or what sort of, I imagine you would, what sort of problems do you run into in terms of, these ideas that machine learning and AI algorithms are spitting out versus what can actually be done? Is there a disconnect, and how do you deal with that?
One of the biggest compliments I've gotten recently was from Brad. We were in a car in Tokyo, of all places, and he told me something that I take to heart, which is like, Chris, you're good at identifying opportunities. They may not be the opportunity we need today, but you're good at finding those opportunities. And as an entrepreneur, that's something you need to have a sixth sense on. And the way you get that is just doing it over and over again, messing up, and then realizing how you messed up and then adjusting. It really has gotten to the point where I can just like look at something, and if it doesn't hit a certain point to my mind, like, no, it's not going to work. AI, I think, is another great tool, but a tool is only as good as the person using it. So
Yeah.
I've met a couple of entrepreneurs and engineers that have been applying it, but it's like, I just don't see how you're going to form a business around it. Whereas something like what Wes created, that's a massive change in the industry. If you don't need 80 watts of power, you only need 1 watt. Your solar cells go from here to here,
Absolutely.
or all these other things change. So I'm encouraged by it, but I'm also like cautiously optimistic. It's like television, it's like electricity, it's like how they're going to use it is really the key to what's going to be great about it.
Yeah, I hear that. That makes sense. Thank you, Chris, again, for all of your insight. I'm out of questions to pick your brain with. If anybody else has any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or in the Q&A session. You can also raise your hand and unmute. But otherwise, thank you all for being here today. I think there's a poll ready from ISS National Labs to hear about your thoughts on the webinar. If you're able to fill that out, that would be lovely. Oh, we do have another question. Okay. Sasank also asks, do you think aerospikes are feasible for heavy lift vehicles?
Short answer, yes. But it's going to take a lot of optimization. I mean, you look at Starship, they have battle-tested nozzles, and yet routinely on those experimental vehicles, they've been failing. So I totally see that happening on a large ramp aerospike or something similar to that being applied to a heavy lift vehicle. They were talking about doing it and starting work on it in NASA for the Venture Star. I think the math supports it, but it's going to be hard.
Thank you for that. Another question, if everything goes humanity's ways for the next 10 years, what does the brightest future look like, in your opinion?
If we get a post-Starship world, at the very least, then we've got a space economy. Because if you can move that kind of weight routinely, and even if it's just once a month, so you're talking about 12 times a month, you're talking about 1,200 tons of payload being moved annually. You could build probably 14 space stations, ISSs, in that time frame. That amount of mass being moved. Now you've got the ability to create, support logistically a real space economy where people are living and working in space. And that, I think if everything works out the way the industry is going, that would be the brightest. That would be amazing. That then we've got, not onesie twosie, but hundreds of people on the moon. Hundreds of people in low Earth orbit and cislunar, and a few people probably on Mars. And that would be amazing. And I hope I'm part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would drastically change what the spaceflight industry and economy looks like. Very exciting. This question is from Adrian. They're asking, what is your opinion on the importance / potential of Starship? I know you touched on it, but anything additional?
Yeah, as much as I would love it if he switched to aerospikes, and he's talked about it in the past, meaning Elon Musk. It's just, I think he shares my opinion. It's just going to be really hard if he just decide, all right, we're dropping everything. We're going to do aerospikes. All right, let's go. Because you got to change all of your engineering capability, your logistics, your supply chain. It's a massive undertaking, especially at that scale. But anyway, Starship, yeah, I fully support, even though he's destroying the environment on a daily basis in Brownsville, because what we just talked about, it'll support and create a space economy, period. And there's no other launch vehicle currently coming out that is anywhere close to that, in my opinion. You could say that Blue Origin is coming up behind them. Yeah, but they're not, they don't have their hair on fire the way Elon does. He's going to get there first. And that's not fair. SpaceX will get there first because Elon isn't out there with a wrench doing all of this. There was a picture of everyone working on Starship recently. I didn't realize there was like 40,000 people, like all on the pad, and they were like in this square. I don't know how they did that, but a huge amount of people, or some 4,000. Sorry, it's probably not 40,000, but it was a big amount of people.
Yeah. That picture was impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, they all have their fingerprint on this, whether it be a small thing like the guy sweeping up the stuff after he's blown up the place, or the programmers, the engineers, and the fuel and the cryo people. it's everyone at SpaceX. And that's why I'm encouraged that this isn't just gonna like get to space and be like, all right, we're going home, we did it, like the way we did with Apollo. Because there's like a ton of dreamers there. They all want to see this happen. So yeah, between that and everything else, I think Starship is going to make a huge impact on space in general.
Yeah, the energy on the SpaceX like live streams is just infectious, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah.
Yeah.
They all get burnt out on a annual basis, but they don't care.
Yeah, yeah. On that note, Adrian's also asking your thoughts on rocketry creating too much pollution, how you weigh environmental damage against the future of a space economy. What do you think
Yeah,
about that?
so as we get closer to that high cadence package that I was talking about, we're feeling the same way. I want to live in a world that has rockets going up the way airlines are, but is not like turning our stratosphere into pea soup. So our propellants on the launch vehicles we're using are RP1 and hydrogen peroxide for that reason. I want to see if I can get the power plant to be so efficient that we can almost be a monopropellant and use just peroxides, because then the byproduct is water and a little bit of additives. So yeah, I'm with you on that. There is a way to clean it up. I think we'll get closer to that as we go in the future. And if we can do it right, the diffusion side of it is probably the best answer, because the kind of fusion we're using, the byproduct is just superheated helium, which I'm being told is going extinct or something like that. There's not much helium left on the planet. So there we go. So we're not only protecting the planet, we're also replenishing it with fusion. So yeah, I'd like to go in that direction as well. I don't think SpaceX cares right now, but I think they will. Same thing with Rocket Lab, Blue Origin, the rest of them, because it's just, the people backing them, they are all thinking that way too. They want a green planet. So I imagine they're going to have to listen to their investors eventually and switch out to something else. And hopefully, maybe somebody on this call will come up with a way to do metallic hydrogen, and then all our answers, all of our problems are solved. Because then, the byproduct's nothing, and then, but it's super powerful, and this much can get you to the moon.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Chris, again, for all of your insights. Thank you, everybody, for being here today on another ASGSR Students webinar. The recording of this will get posted on our YouTube page. If you're able to, please answer the poll so we can learn a little bit more about the impact we're having with our webinars. And we will be having another one soon, so stay tuned for that announcement as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.